Good afternoon, good evening. It's almost 6 o'clock, 1 minute, and I can see we have a few participants in. Can't see any of them or any of you in the chat yet, but hello. If you are connected to the chat, say hi. I'm talking as well as typing because I forget that you're there live listening to what I'm saying. But it's a one-way process, I guess, so I don't have the feedback loop to know that you can hear me. To the chat, say hi. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes to give the chance to a few others to join us, and then hopefully you'll have the chance to connect to your to the live chat, so that we can take the questions and then we can work. Hey, hello, Andrew, my dear friend. How are you, my wonderful friend? I can hear you. Perfect. Yes, thanks for letting me know. Unmeng Tai. Hi. Hello, Unmeng Tai. Welcome to the chat. Welcome to the live session. And 6 o'clock. Yeah, we'll wait a few more minutes. We currently have about 6 participants and 2 of them on the chat. Virginia. Oh, hello, Virginia. I didn't recognize you by the Chinese name. Welcome. Eleonora, benvenuta anche a te. We'll be doing the whole session in English, and we already have friends from France, Italy, Singapore, and I'm sure there'll be a few more countries joining us as well. This is so exciting. It's the first time ever that I use this type of technology, in this particular case, YouTube Live. So I'm not particularly sure of the mechanics of the technology itself. We have Paul who's joining us. Hello, Paul. Welcome. I'm hearing you from Batam, Indonesia. Wonderful. Lovely to have you on board. So I was saying, first time I use it, I'm not quite sure about the mechanics of the YouTube Live, but I thought it's a technology we have at our disposal. Might as well make use of it and learn what we can from it. I'll wait for 1 more minute. At 6:02, at 6:03, we can get started with the more formal proceedings. So we give chance to those who are a little bit behind to also connect. We have Anton. Hello, Anton. Lovely to see you here. Welcome. Welcome to you as well. So far, I can see that people I know are on board. I believe this was publicized also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, I think. So we might have people who we don't know. Wonderful. The more the merrier. Everybody has an opportunity here to connect and share with this community. Okay, I'm gonna get started. It's 6:03. We have 1 hour together, and I'm gonna use a timer so that we can keep on track. I'm sure you have other things to get on with. I'm not sure whether you can hear it, but there's a gong, and I'll mark it again 10 minutes before the end of the hour. So again, welcome to all of you who have joined, whether you are on the chat or not. It's great to have you on board and to have the opportunity to share this with you today. The structure of the hour is very straightforward. I'll spend maybe a couple of minutes now to do a little bit of an introduction, both about the Q&A that you have just joined, and in case there are people here who don't know me, who have not worked with me, or are not familiar with my work and myself, a little bit of introduction of me, and then we'll step into a 5 minutes pause. The pause after the introduction is designed to give us the opportunity to basically let go of whatever is behind us from today, from Wednesday, 22nd of April. You might have been busy working, you might have been taking care of family, business, and now you've taken the opportunity to be with yourself, to nourish your, hopefully, intellect, your emotions, maybe your body and your spirit, I don't know. But hopefully you can get whatever you need out of this session. And in order to break away from what was and be present to the session, we'll take a 5 minutes centering activity. Then we'll move into the Q&A itself. So why the quarantine Q&A with Dr. O? Where did it come from? I think, like everybody in lockdown, pretty much everywhere around the world, I too have been impacted by this experience, both personally and from a business perspective. And one of the things that I think merges between the professional and the personal was a desire to do more, a desire to contribute more. My business as a clinical consultant in psychology and sexology has indeed seen a drop, like I think every business in the world. And I was feeling that in that I was not having the opportunity to help as much as I like to have. And so I've been racking my brain around what can I do extra? What can I do to reach out? And then I came to know about this technology, but I had no idea how to use it. I had no idea what kind of functionality it had. And so it sat in the back of my mind, never really as a possibility to do something with. And then a few days ago, last week or the week before, I forget now, after sending out a few emails to my mailing list, I received some really exciting and unexpected positive feedback about the online clinical sessions that I was running. And that reminded me that, hey, there is video technology that helps us reach to the world, and that gives us the opportunity to do work, in my case, to help my clients. So I remembered that this technology existed and decided, hey, I'm going to put up a YouTube live session. And then if anybody wants to join, we can answer any questions they have around mental health. And if you are familiar with it, the Wim Hof Method, in the hope to help them during this quarantine period, knowing that some people are probably having a worse experience than before the quarantine, and some people might be having a better experience than before the quarantine. To give you an example on both, I've heard stories of people in the positive side who said, it's been years since I've been able to sleep well or spend time of quality with my family members and my partner. Finally, I have this opportunity. This is just one example of positive stories. On the negative end, people who live alone or who already have some serious mental health issues, who have struggled with isolation. And unfortunately, as it is the case with certain mental health issues, when one gets low, isolation is what they seek, but it's the least positive thing that they can engage with. And so they tend to close up and be more isolated even within the isolation. So as you can imagine, that can be quite taxing. So here we are, quarantine Q&A with Dr. O, and the opportunity to answer all of your questions. Again, in case there's somebody online who doesn't know me or hasn't worked with me, the purpose of my work and the way I engage myself in life in general has a lot to do with alleviating unnecessary suffering. And I think the key word in that sentence is unnecessary. I see, as a psychologist and a clinical sexologist, I see clients from all walks of life with a wide range of questions and conditions and situations in life. And it's quite apparent to me that often these conditions, which create suffering, create unnecessary suffering. Unnecessary because sometimes the suffering comes from lack of knowledge, or perhaps comes from never having been taught a particular skill that they can use practically in relationships, in daily life, in their own health and well-being. And these are easy things to address. Knowledge and skills are very, very simple. And so it's a shame to see so much suffering when there really isn't the need for it. And I guess this live Q&A is another opportunity to share knowledge and hopefully skills that you can use to improve your situation. The way I do my work is through clinical practice primarily. I see both individuals and couples. And I also am a qualified Wim Hof Method instructor. And if you want to know about what the Wim Hof Method is, you can check the description of this video. There's a link there. But it's basically a method that marries mindset, breathing techniques, and cold exposure to create a stronger, a healthier, and a happier life. So I'm a practitioner and instructor of this method. And I also apply this in a retreat that I've developed. And then again, it's designed to help people alleviate unnecessary suffering and find their opportunity for healing and growth. So that's a little bit about why this live Q&A has been put together, and a little bit about me. If you already have questions, by all means, you can begin to think about the context that I shared with you and what you might want to ask me. But to transition nicely from whatever our day was until now into the Q&A, we're just going to take 5 minutes and we're going to use them as follow. The first 3 minutes, we're just going to take to be quiet. You can close your eyes or not, but my invite to you is that you try and really stay centered to yourself. And the invite is that you center on your breathing. Just for 3 minutes, noticing your normal rate of breath, whether you breathe from your nose or from your mouth, whether your breath is shallow or deep, whether you breathe with your chest or with your belly, whether you breathe fast or slow, just noticing whatever might be happening with your breath. And then the second part of the 5 minutes, the last 2 minutes, we will do a breathing exercise. This is a breathing exercise designed to slow down the nervous system. And in particular, is a breathing exercise designed to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Again, I can answer questions about that if you have any. And the way we'll do the exercise is very, very simple. We'll sit comfortably, take a slow, full breath in, and then we'll try and make the longest exhale we can possibly make. Imagine you're trying to break the Olympic record. When you're out of breath completely, then you take another deep breath and you continue to make our longest exhale possible. We'll do that for 2 minutes. That will bring our 5 minutes to an end, and then we delve into the Q&A. I can see in the meantime a couple more people have joined the chat. Raki and Kevin, welcome to you both. So let's begin our 5 minutes break. The 3 minutes quiet time begins now. Just paying attention to your breath. Trying to quiet your mind. Trying to quiet your body. Just noticing how you breathe. And enjoying the sensations of the breath entering your body and bringing life in the form of oxygen. And coming out, removing toxins in the form of CO2. Just breathe. As we enter the last 2 minutes of this little break, begin to purposely pay attention to how you breathe, breathing fully in and breathing out as slowly as you can, making the longest exhale possible. Okay, bringing the breathing to its natural pace, taking advantage of these few minutes of just slowing everything down. You might have noticed your breath now more naturally feels fuller and slower. Perhaps some of you might have noticed your heart rate slowing down. Um, you might have experienced a change in body temperature sensation. Maybe you might have felt a little bit of energy or tingling moving around your body, depending on how deeply you were breathing. This is a really wonderful, wonderful exercise to slow everything down. And I recommend in moments of stress, like for example, you might be going for an important meeting, or maybe you have a presentation, or you're about to propose to your partner, or you're having to have a difficult conversation with them. This is a wonderful way to just slow everything down. It's very simple, a few breaths in, and then the longest possible exhale that you can make, breathing out really, 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 really slowly. Okay, so we can step into the Q&A formally now, and obviously this being a one-way process in terms of talking and listening, I'm going to go by what you guys write in the chat. So feel free to start posting. And the nature of the questions that I'm happy to address is anything to do with mental health, in particular in relation to being in a lockdown, being quarantined, feeling isolated, anything that might come with it, whether you are alone or with a partner, and all of the opportunities and challenges that come with being alone or with a partner. And in addition to that, I'm happy to take questions around the Wim Hof Method, which some of you might already be familiar with, some of you might not. And it's a wonderful method to really provide greater health, greater strength, and greater happiness. And so perhaps while I wait for some of your questions to come in, I'll take the opportunity to share a little bit about what the method is about, and why it's so important, and how I marry it with my psychology work to help my clients. So the Wim Hof method is the marriage of cold exposure, breathing, and mindset, invented by a gentleman called Wim Hof, who was 61 years old yesterday, and who has done some really amazing things through his life to do with cold exposure and pushing the body to the limit. Now, his method has been studied scientifically through quite a lot of different lenses: medical lenses, physiological lenses, now psychological lenses. And it's quite apparent that through these breathing and mindset and cold exposure techniques, we are able to access our brain in ways that we previously did not think was possible to do voluntarily. And this is absolutely crucial for health: mental health, physiological health, spiritual health, emotional health, you name it. It's critical for us to be able to voluntarily access some of our brain capabilities in order to create a more balanced lifestyle, in order to create a fulfilling and satisfying life experience. And so, through this method and through the knowledge and techniques that come from general psychology, which is applied to, again, a whole broad range of techniques and domains, I've been able to help my clients. So, one example that I can share of my personal experience, being in isolation at home, even though I'm not completely alone. My mom is here from Italy, which is a blessing given what has happened in Italy. Um, I have felt the impact of not going to the clinic, not seeing my clients, not helping as much and as frequently as I usually do. And clearly, this says a lot about my psychology and what I might need to work on of my own accord. But it's uh, um, it's obvious that it has an impact on me. So what I do, very simply, I keep my routine in the morning. So I have a chest freezer at home, which I converted into an ice plunge. So every morning I take my ice bath. And just the 3, 5, 10 minutes that I spend in the ice bath is enough to set me up for the whole day. I do my breathing exercises, and you might not necessarily have an ice bath, and maybe your cold showers aren't as cold if you live in tropical countries. But the point is, I keep a routine that has to do with my body, my mental health, that sets me up in a peak state where I can still remain productive and focus my energy on other things that are not necessarily available to me when I'm fully busy with the clinic. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. I'm happy to expand on it. So we have a question. I'll read it up just in case you're unable to see it in the chat for yourself. So Andrew, thank you for the question, by the way. He says, my question is around post-confinement. In France, we are currently not allowed to go and visit our parents. When the government lifts gradually the confinement, how do I consider seeing them again? Risky? Thank you for the session. I believe this type of session is very useful. Thanks for the comment as well. So, when the government lifts gradually the confinement, how do I consider seeing them again? Risky? I think we can answer that question from multiple angles. So the first that comes to mind would be a social angle. So looking at Andrew, you, and your parents as a system, and acknowledging the fact that you both, as components of the system, having spent a considerable amount of time, I'm assuming weeks, if not months, I'm not exactly sure how long France has been in lockdown, but I'm assuming weeks, probably months, having all experienced that kind of isolation, the system coming back together, the component parts of the system coming back together are not going to be as oiled as they previously were when you were regularly visiting each other and in contact. The impact of this not being so oiled might come to surface in multiple ways. There might be an emotional response, which in all cases can be positive, negative, or neutral. I'll just share examples that pop into my head and label them as necessary. But a positive response emotionally might be re-experiencing that sense of longing, that sense of love and connection, as when not seeing a partner or a loved one for a long time after a long travel. A negative response might be finding people's habits, which we might no longer be so accustomed to, somewhat irritating. And a broad range of reactions, obviously an infinite possibility range of reactions, but it's likely that that could be an emotional reaction, a behavioral reaction that you will respond to. Without going into much more details, that being the context, the social element, the systemic element, clearly can be helped through technology. WhatsApp messages, regular video calls, phone calls if necessary. There's still an opportunity to connect with each other and keep that connection alive, so that coming back together physically after the lockdown is lifted is not going to be such an impactful experience as it might be were you to have complete isolation from each other. So that's a systemic angle. I think that also be potentially an individual angle for all of us to consider when reconnecting with family members, and in the case of Andrew's question, reconnecting with parents after the lockdown. Because a few weeks are sufficient time to create new neural pathways in our brain, and therefore to begin to embed new behaviors into habits. Now, clearly, they're not going to be as strong habits as something that you might have been practicing for months, years, or decades. But, a few weeks of practicing something, it can be anything, an exercise regime, a breathing exercise, living in isolation, doing something new, is sufficient for new neural networks to start to form in a significant way, that habits begin to be formed. So the other thing to look out for after confinement might be, what new habits have I formed? What new expectations have I created of myself and indeed of the environment around me that I am beginning to like or dislike, and that might come to collision with the environment, with your parents, loved ones, family members, friends, whoever it is you'll reconnect with, when the lockdown is out. So keep an eye on both the systemic constellation, the systemic functions, the systemic energy and dynamics, and also keep an eye on your individual being and who you are when re-entering the world and reconnecting to people. If you have follow-up questions, by all means, do ask. In the meantime, I see there's another question. I'll pick that up from Virginia. How not to overwork myself during my time staying at home? There are work, housework, family, kids, home-based learning, kids home-based learning going together. All of a sudden, there are so many hats to wear. Oh, yes. I've had quite a few of my clients in Singapore where the government has transferred the entire education system online, and where daily there are activities for children to engage with. Now, the activities the children engage with are created and shared by the school system, therefore the teachers and the infrastructures behind them. but the children are no longer part of the infrastructure itself. They are now having to engage in their learning experiences at home. So the changes that they are having to adapt to are gigantic, which would therefore have an impact to their experience of being at home and yet having to do school things, but also their way in which they relate to their parents. So coming now to Virginia's questions, you now have a situation where, in the example of education for people who have kids, parents are having to basically learn a completely new set of skills so that they can be teachers to their children while at the same time not becoming surrogates for their teachers, and at the same time maintaining parenting skills that are necessary to regulate the relationship with their kids within the confinement of home. It's a mind-boggling experience for anyone to go through, given the number of moving parts and given the number of changing, shifting roles that this situation has created. So when you add to it being with a partner 24/7, when before we all had our personal space, work space, professional space, business space, exercise space, now we're all crammed together into the same room, into the same house, into the same space, in some countries not being allowed to exit at all, except for really, really important or urgent situations, is very, very taxing. So to address Virginia's questions on how to manage the stressors that come from all of these additional demands and expectations that are placed on us individually, my recommendation would be to be mindful of, I would say, two things. Number one, routines, where they exist and where they don't exist, to create new routines that accommodate the new roles that you've all acquired. And two, to also be mindful of space. So I'll articulate a little bit more both, so hopefully you get some practical tools and tips to how to actually manage this. It's important to manage routines. Actually, as I was saying a few moments ago about my morning routine and how I set up myself for the day, even though my routine has completely changed. Because our body and our minds need anchors to connect to create a sense of movement, to create a sense of meaning and purpose. And a lot can come in terms of action when we are feeling purposeful, meaningful, and somewhat engaged in what we are doing. Now, given that the bucket we are operating within has been completely overwhelmed by items in this bucket that earlier didn't exist, that have now entered and creating a completely different ecosystem, to be able to find structure and either, as I say, create new routines, or where possible, maintaining the routines that you already have and diligently keeping to it as much as possible, is one way that I found helps me and my clients keep some structure and some meaning in what otherwise is a fairly chaotic environment. And the second point of being mindful of and managing space is probably even more important, and the routines can help us achieve what I'm about to describe. We exist in these lockdown situations not only as a member of a system that is locked down within the confinement of their space, and that therefore becomes an entity in its own right, but we also continue to exist as an individual on our own right. In fact, I'm probably going to draw something about this. And I'm going to do it in the example of what could be a relationship between two partners rather than a whole family constellation, so that the drawing is easier. But please know that this can be applied to absolutely any context whatsoever. So the idea is that each of the circles I'm drawing represents one individual. So we have circle A is me, circle B is my partner, and the space in between is the space we occupy psychologically together. And in this case, let's say it's our relationship. But again, remember, this can be you, and we could put other circles to represent your other family members or children. And the intersecting space would be the family, the household, etc. So basically, we continue to exist both as individuals as well as members of a constellation that is made up of many individuals. The rules of engagement here as an individual or within the constellation of the system are different, and they each need to be maintained in order for the system to stay in equilibrium, to stay balanced. Excuse me. So if I all of a sudden become overwhelmed, and let's take an extreme example. I've heard many a times women who have just become mothers, just babies at home, a few days, a few weeks old, who are so overwhelmed by the work necessary to look after the baby that they literally stop showering. They have no more time seemingly to do anything else because their focus and attention is all on learning how I take care of this child. Now, it's a different scenario, but it's a pretty overwhelming situation. And I would imagine psychologically being thrown into the deep end of suddenly being mother, father, lover, partner, companion, friend, teacher, household keeper, and you name it, as it is the case in this lockdown, can be pretty overwhelming too. So in those situations, remembering that I still exist as an individual and creating routines where 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, I dedicate space to myself, as well as dedicating the rest, probably the majority of the time, to the system, is a sure way of creating a balance that gives you better tools, better strength, better awareness to be balanced in the way in which you manage all of these additional demands and expectations. So I hope, Virginia, this answers your question. And again, if you have a follow-up, please let me know. I'm happy to address it. We have a question from Elia. How can an old person manage with the lockdown? Interesting question. So two things immediately come to mind as I read that question. There would be elderly people in the world at the moment who are completely alone. They are living isolated at home in a country that doesn't allow connection, doesn't allow interaction, and who would be struggling mightily, probably even with very basic daily functions, whether it is looking after themselves or having things taken care of, like paying bills and buying groceries. And at the other end of the spectrum, as I'm thinking of the question, there would be elderly who live with somebody else. It could be their elderly partner, or it could be the extended family, or indeed a community where some of those challenges that I described in the first example won't exist. So I think I'll answer the question of how can an older person manage the lockdown, looking at the two extremes as an example of how I'm thinking about it. And I'll make some assumptions as I go through it too. So let's begin with the extreme case where an elderly person is completely alone and probably can't even receive visitors and or support. Now, this would be a dire situation, probably a life-threatening situation as well. And making the assumption that this person is physically and mentally healthy, hence why likely they're still completely alone, living independently and not with help or in a community, I would encourage this person, like I just answered for Virginia, to find the way to keep routines, to find the way to keep the mind and the body engaged. And while the opportunity for perhaps going out of the house for a leisurely walk around the block or in the park might no longer be available, using the confined space of home to have a walk, literally, to just walk around the rooms and have some physical movement or do some basic physical exercise to keep the blood flowing through the muscles so that the body doesn't become stagnant and therefore more likely to become sore and or ill, could help. Obviously, there are other routines like reading, engaging with family members through technology, all of the possible tools that we have at our disposal to stay connected in what feels like a meaningful set of activities, either to look after ourselves or to engage with the community. I guess the core ingredient I'm trying to propose in all of these answers is that managing a moment of isolation well is strongly helped by connecting to self and connecting to a community. Whether the community is one other person or 100 other people, it doesn't matter. But it's the idea of being connected. Isolation psychologically is not a good place to be, especially already when you are not well mentally, physically, or both. If I go at the other end of the spectrum and I look at elderly family members who are either with each other or with extended family, then the principles that I would apply are the same. Maintaining a healthy routine of connection and engagement both with oneself and with one's partner and or family members, so to create that sense of purpose and engagement. I think as I'm speaking over the last three questions actually, I'm getting a real sense that the theme that, at least for me, is key and common to all of the scenarios I've presented so far is the idea of being aware of self and of the system we occupy, and actively keeping routines and engagements and activities that connect us to us and the community. So perhaps that's the theme emerging out of all these questions. Thank you for your answer to my question. I am scared to unknowingly transit my parents the virus when I reconnect, and this thought will affect my relationship with them. So if I'm reading it correctly, the fear once reconnecting with family members after the lockdown physically is actually to do with the virus and the possibility of connecting it, and the possibility of passing it on. It's a huge fear, of course, especially for those of us who have elderly parents. So as I mentioned earlier, my mom is here visiting from Italy, and when I was working at the clinic still, sometimes in early March, I had introduced a very stringent set of rules so that I could still see my clients in the clinic, but would be minimizing the potential of infection. And so this included no physical touch, like handshakes and whatever, keeping a certain distance, plus a questionnaire I was going through to get a sense for what risk level they posed and whether they had any symptoms, etc. And about 1 week before the Singapore government announced the lockdown, about 1 week before, I realized that my anxiety had grown really high. And I had kept an eye on it growing over the time period, we had the first case here in Singapore on the 23rd of January. So this is something that had been at the back of my mind for 2 months, a month and a half already, a month plus. And I noticed that the anxiety had to do with, if I catch the virus, my demographic statistical chance of getting seriously sick and or dead is close to none. But if I catch the virus and I take it home right now, while my mom is here visiting, who's 77, and thankfully she's very strong, very healthy, very active mentally and physically, so in good shape, but the risk levels are going to be huge. So first of all, Andrew, I completely resonate with the fear of, what if the lockdown is lifted and I am engaging in activities while being careful? That means that I catch the virus, maybe in an asymptomatic way, and then I'm going to engage with my family members and potentially pass it on, creating a really, really high risk level. It's a possibility. I don't have an answer specifically to the practicalities of what would be best practice. But from a mental health perspective, from a psychological perspective, what helped me in my situation has been the following. First, staying tuned in to my own anxiety and wondering, why am I feeling like this? What's happening? Obviously, the virus is not the only thing per se, because there are social impacts, there are family impacts, there are business impacts, there are financial impacts. So staying tuned in with, why am I feeling anxious? And then realizing, okay, it's to do with the virus. And then, to the best of my ability, act in a way that minimized all risks. I mentioned already the practices and the protocols I introduced at the clinic. The other thing I did with some of my colleagues, and indeed some of my clients commented as being extreme, I locked down the clinic 1 week before the government even announced our own lockdown. It was a little extreme, I appreciate that, but my anxiety arrived at a point where I was no longer willing to take the risk. My desire to protect, in this case, my mom, was higher than whatever was going to happen with the clinic. And so I decided to shut down the clinic, move everything online, and hey presto, 1 week later, the government shut everything down, and mental health services, unfortunately, I have to say, I have a lot to say about this, were not considered part of essential services. I appreciate it from a virus risk perspective, but I would argue in this moment people need mental health support more than ever. But anyway, the government then shut it down, therefore I kind of became aligned with government requirements. What is the point I'm trying to make here? I did everything I could do within the constraints of my bucket, of my sphere of influence, to create practical protocols and behaviors that completely minimized the risk. And that included communicating with the stakeholders, in this case, my mom. So I would invite you, Andrew, to do the same. Acknowledge the fact that there might be some anxiety coming from what happens when the lockdown is lifted and I see my parents. Am I going to catch the virus, bring it back home to my family, my kids? And God knows if I bring it over to my mom and dad, who are of a certain age, acknowledge that that exists. Because the moment you have acknowledged it, it gives you the power to then look within the sphere of influence that you have and do everything in your power to create the mitigating behaviors that are going to reduce the risks or eliminate them altogether. If, for example, you choose to still not visit your parents in person. And then the final part of this question, of this answer, obviously communicating with all of the stakeholders. So if that's what you're feeling, if that's what you're thinking, having a video call with your parents to say, hey, look, this is where I'm at. Government is indicating that they're going to lift the lockdown in a week, whatever, 2 weeks. These are my worries. How would you guys suggest we manage it? And then together coming up with an answer as to how you manage it and how you mitigate or eliminate the risks. So I hope this helps you as well. Okay, there's no more questions so far. How are we clocking? 51 minutes. Okay, we have about 12 minutes on our clock. Let me see if I can add something else, perhaps, to help you with previous. Obviously, if there's more questions, I'm happy to receive them and address them. Maybe something that is coming to mind to make sure that we understand the importance of the whole is to remember that as we are managing these lockdown situations, the whole is made up of many component parts. That's the case both if you look at it from an individual perspective or from a systemic perspective. So from an individual perspective, remembering that you are having to manage not only your emotions, not only your thoughts, but also your body and your connections with the community you are with, gives you the opportunity to be holistic in how you address your individual needs. And so there might be needs for rest, needs for activity, physical activity or exercise. You might need emotional support from a family member or maybe from somebody else in your community. But staying aware of the fact that you exist as a component, as an entity, as a being made up of multiple parts, and that each of those parts need help. So, for example, for me, the physical component is helped by my breathing routine in the morning, by my ice bath. And then we still can go out exercising in Singapore. Almost every day I go out for a really long cycle. From an emotional perspective, I can reach out to friends, I can reach out to family, I can reach out to my own therapist, I can have conversations that help me with intellect, with ideas, with emotional support. And so, again, I can get that feed, that nurturing and support necessary. From a spiritual perspective, by which I mean that domain where we feel that we are connected to and working for something that is bigger than ourselves, then doing something like this for me is very valuable. It makes me feel like I'm contributing more. I'm using the skills and the tools that I have at my disposal to do something extra, to, knowing that it's needed and that, it's value added that hopefully people can benefit from. It's wonderfully nurturing for me. So whatever the idea and the tools and the skills that you have, remember you individually exist as an entity that needs multiple feedings. And the same for the household, for the community. So everybody in the house and the household itself as an entity in its own right will continue to need physical space, physical engagement, emotional, etc., etc. So remain aware that the routines and the connections that I keep talking about are multifaceted in nature. And so trying to stay balanced, addressing a little bit all of them might be very useful. Okay, there are no more questions coming in. So I'll take this as an opportunity to wrap up, given that we have 7 minutes left, and bring the session to a close. So first thing I would say is thank you, seriously and deeply from my heart. All of you who have joined the session and who have contributed with your questions, I really want to thank you. It makes your presence makes this possible. So I really appreciate you showing up. Remember that I'm going to do this until further notice every Wednesday, and it's going to be 6 p.m. Singapore time, same format, same purpose. So family and friends can join if you want to invite them. I'm happy to take any questions, once again, around mental health and the Wim Hof method or other physical practices that I do. And finally, if you want to learn more about my work or the Wim Hof method or the retreat that I offer called the Wim Hof, the Heis, there's links in the description of the video. And again, thank you very much. I wish you all well. I wish you to stay safe and all of your family members. And I look forward to reconnect with you again in 1 week's time. For now, much love. Bye for now.